chapter 35, page Nun Tes 59, Ayin Beis, volume 1, Discourse 9. We're discussing the spiritual spatial structure of the spheres. And after explaining in chapter 33 how it works in the faculties of the nefesh, the faculties of the soul, which means the human faculties, that each, besides the fact that every energy and container are tailored and fitting perfectly to each other seamlessly, as a result of that, they also create a whole gradation, a whole structure, what he calls Ma'alamata, higher and lower, with the more intense energy manifesting in the more subtle containers. So basically, it's directly antithetical to each other. The more subtle the energy, the less subtle the container, the less subtle is the energy. So they work in direct disproportion to each other, so to speak. So when one is stronger, the other one is weaker, basically. Like the Lashon in Zehar, it says, "Tuk for the gufa choshe de nishmasa." When the body is powerful, the soul is weaker. The soul is powerful, the body is weaker.
Direct correlation.
Yeah, direct. He said direct. So, bottom line is, it just demonstrates how he's talking about interface. That this is a real partnership. There's no way this is going to work. In other words, there's no way that the energy can overwhelm the container. If the container is not prepared and refined, the energy just won't flow in that way. And when it is, then it flows perfectly. And each part of the body and the faculties, and the same thing above, works exactly what it needs. So Chochmah has the minimalistic container, a nakuda, a point, and therefore its energy is, its intensity, its subtlety, and so on, is very powerful. Bina, the containers expand, become more substantial, simply by the fact that more details and so on.
Because the energy is more powerful, it's less graspable, right? Less.
It goes both ways. Yeah, it goes both ways. Bottom line is, you could say the rule is that the more you can define it, the less pure it is. Real pure things are not definable, so to speak.
For us.
No. So, like you said, to bring it to a student lower, you need to bring it down. So, for the container perspective, you need diminished energy, like the teacher-student. But if you talk about pure intensity of the idea, obviously it's there when there's less containers. Now, we're not getting now in Talmidei Yeshu Mekulam that when it comes in containers, it brings a whole new energy. He's not going there. Right now, he's just talking the plain. There's the basic principle of the structure itself. We're not talking about what each one does for the other, because obviously. So in chapter 34, after giving that example, he said, "Medugma mekolzeh is in the Lamaila, above," and there he went through basically all the spheres. Chochmah, which is the Yud, or the Yud Kei Vav Kei. The container there is the most sublime and ethereal, and hence the energy is that intense or powerful. Bina, on the other hand, is already more substantial containers, so it conceals Chochmah. That's why you need to part the sea. You need, in order to pierce the waters of Bina, so to speak, in order to reach the deeper Chochmah. And then comes Midas. Emotions and Malchus, even more so, where their containers are dominant, there it's the most diminished. And then he discussed, based on this, the difference where you find at times that the number, volume, is it higher? The higher you go, is it more volume or less volume, basically? Sometimes like this, sometimes like that. Sometimes, in other words, the higher numbers are the higher you go, Keser and so on. Sometimes the higher the numbers are lower, and above is oneness. And the answer, of course, is perspective of containers, perspective of energy. From the perspective of energy, the higher you go, the more you have. And the lower you go, it gets diminished, like the teacher that keeps diminishing it as he brings it to lower and lower students. But when you talk from the perspective of containers, the lower you go, the more containers there are. So containers are more lower, and as you go higher, less containers and more sublime energy. And then he concludes with explaining the pasuk anar b'mei shana, that the nar, the child, or the young person will be 100 years. That means that even someone who has weak containers as a nar will then merit or earn his way to be able to achieve the level of Meya, which is the highest number, the 100th complete. Then he explains the Mishnah, the Meya Shana, Ki'ilu Mes, Revolver Bottle Min Ha'elam. What kind of virtue is that? That's the virtue of going Mes, meaning being able to achieve something that, which is seeing God Himself, you cannot see while you're alive. So he has a taste of that, because he's gone through the bitter, the refinement of his animal soul. He's broken it, so to speak. In other words, in a way, he's broken his containers, so now he's able to merit a certain higher intensity of energy. The interesting thing I want to note, I looked up the source for this, it's an Eira Teira Chaisara, basically this explanation. And the interesting thing, the pasuk says, Nar b'mei shana yomos. He doesn't bring the yomos, but it's a nice explanation in the pasuk based on this, because mos, ki'ilu mes. So in other words, he just brings Ben Shei, because the pasuk really doesn't say, the pasuk is not coming to say when a young person is going to be 100 years. It says that a young person is going to die at 100 years. So in a way you could say he's interpreting the pasuk, even though he doesn't spell it out, because it's so similar to the Mishnah. Tzemach Tzedek doesn't do it either, but it's an interesting interpretation of the pasuk in that verse. In other words, what does it mean? Benar b'mei shana yamus would mean he reaches the level of Mei Shana, which is the level of Kesed, which is just throwing that into the little pot here. So it's an interesting positive twist on the whole concept. Okay. So now we continue on chapter 35, Lamed. Page Nuntes. And now, just like in the 10 spheres, there's a diversity of upper and lower, higher and lower. Same thing, there's also a diversity, a structure, dischalkus, diversity is maybe the best word yet. Dischalkus, the diversity of higher and lower, also in the world. So let me just give a few words about Esesphiris and Elamis. I discussed it several times, but let me just spell it out, because it's one of those things that you just need to have doesn't say it all, it's somewhere specific, it's just the sum of the whole picture. And that is, in the DNA of existence, spiritual DNA, as we discussed spheres a few chapters back when he spoke about the hidden spheres, he said a sphere basically is a gili. Sphere is God's way of expressing Himself. So when you say the vision is a vision of a certain particular world, for practical purpose that means there's spheres. So the 10 spheres is the basic building blocks that will make up all of existence, whole seder histalshilus. And that's why you have spheres on every level. You have spheres agnuzis, the hidden ones. You have them in the kav. You have them in ak. You have them in akudim, nekudim, vrudim, Beriyah, Yetzirah and Asiya. Wherever you go, even Elam Hazak Ashmi, everything is a configuration of the 10 spheres, which, as we know, evolves into the 10 Maimaris, Asara Maimaris, the 10 utterances. Say, Basara Maimaris Nivra Elam, like the Alter Rebbe makes it clear, it's not only the 10 were uttered actually, literally, in the Chumash. When you count them, you have 10. You hear Eir is 1, and Bereshis Nam and Maimarhu, so that makes it the 10th. So there's 10. But then, those 10 break down into millions of configurations that create the rest of the existence. So God didn't have to say, let there be a frog, or let there be a chont. No, chont is not is not divine. It's man-made. Sorry. Yeah. Because
chont is not divine?
That's a shock, huh? Okay. So, bottom line is that just like the 10 spheres break down into so many different components, so the simplest example we give is fire and water. Water and fire is chesed and eish. Chesed and gvura, rather. So it breaks down many times, over 10 times 10, 100, and the 100 have a 10 in each one of them, and there's all the configurations. There's also Aser Sadibris. Those 10 are central building blocks. That's the building blocks that the vision of the structure of of the whole seder histalshilus, meaning the whole cosmic order. What are the worlds? Worlds really are the 10 spheres in different stages. They're the stages of gradation that the 10 spheres go through. So in other words, if you only had 10 spheres, that would be the way they are in God's mind, which is the 10 hidden spheres. The meaning of the worlds, and this is critical because people, as soon as you hear worlds, we right away fit it into our concept of worlds, which means planets. That's what people right away. The first time I heard worlds, when I was learning Chassidus, I said, okay, so we're not learning, there's 4 more planets, so to speak. So this way we knew there was Mercury, and Venus, and Mars, Earth, Mars, and so on. I know the planets. Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Today they say Pluto is not a planet. Fine. Eisveld. Yeah, make it a world. It's Eisveld. Nobody has ever been there, but yeah. But so I thought there's 4 more planets called Atzilus, Beriyah, Yetzirah, and Asiya. Because again, we always fit things into preconceived notions. But then you learn worlds does not mean worlds. It's not worlds. It means entities. It means dimensions. So the 10 spheres is really the building blocks. But if you want to know what stage you're at, you have to look at what world they're in. That's where the worlds come in. As I once explained it here, Atzilus, Beriyah, Yetzirah, and Asiya, the simplest way to understand these 4 worlds, which is really, again, these 4 will repeat themselves millions of times in the seder histalshilus. We talk about them as 4 because that's just a way for us to relate specific. But there's the pratis, the elemis apratis, there's Atzilus, Beriyah, Yetzirah, Asiya, Klolis, and Asiya pratis, like a hologram. But you can imagine from that in Atzilus itself you have the 4. And in the Atzilus, Sheba Atzilus, you have the 4, etc., etc. It's always that way. Never think of anything as just pure static 4 and that's it. It doesn't work that way. And a chont is that way. Actually, a chont is not that way. It's endless. But in the ingredients, you bake a cake, you put a little too much of something, it's not going to work. Here, also you need a balance, but it's like a hologram. It's constantly so-called repeated itself. The concept of Elam Katan Zeh, the microcosm, macrocosm. Everything in the macrocosm is in the microcosm, and vice versa. So with that said, just briefly, when we say Elamis, the best way one of the ways I find to explain it is, think of it like in our own case, Atzilus would be the vision of what you want. Any creative process goes through these 4 steps. Beriyah is the skeleton, the outline. Chemer b'Yetzirah. Yetzirah fleshes it out. When you start breaking down the outline into 1A, 1B, C, D, 2A, 2B, like that. And Asiya is the full dimensional body of it. So you look at a structure. An architect has a vision, puts it down in a blueprint. That's Atzilus. Then comes the building of it. The first step in building is you don't start with the whole picture, you start with piece by piece. First you lay out an outline. Then you add to it shape and details. And then you have a final product. And then you call it, that's the final product, Seif Maisa, Machshav Tchila. That's the 4. So our the structure, the way we create, whether this is also writing a book, composing music, a business plan, you name it. There's no such thing that doesn't go through these 4. And by the way, talk about application. If you want to identify a problem in a plan, you can identify, is it a problem on Atzilus level, on the Beriyah level, Yetzirah or Asiya? Very often it's Atzilus, which is the vision. But the vision sometimes can be very fine. But you skip Beriyah. If you go too quickly to Yetzirah before Beriyah, try to make an outline with the details before you have the general. Not that you can't build it piece by piece, but it has to flow in that particular fashion. So now how do the spheres work? So now there's a chesed on the vision level. That would be love as God sees it. Perfect love. We talked about the archetype, the quintessential perfection. Gevura, the way God, exactly the vision. Beriyah, it's already not completely the vision. Now it's already a step away because now it's being created. So chesed of Beriyah would be, it says, Rubei Teiv Miut Ra. That's what it says about Beriyah. Primarily it's good, but there's still, now there's a yesh involved. As soon as there's a yesh, the container is no longer completely aligned with the energy, like it is in Atzilus.
It's also part of the vision. Why say it's not less the vision?
From the point of, because here's a fact. When the builder starts, when the construction starts, let's say, And let's say whoever is the contractor is following the blueprint, but he has, since he's another human being, he can make a mistake because he's no longer the visionary. He's already.
The mistake here is also part of the vision.
The mistake is not part of the vision. First of all, mistakes are made by human beings due to free will. No, we're not talking about. We're talking about, however, the structure. If a person takes an apple off a tree, instead of eating it, Shem Shemaim, to take the energy to do a mitzvah, and he takes it, eats it, and goes and hurts somebody. Yeah, the vision is that he has the free will, but he's not using the apple aligned to the way it should have been used, as Atzilus would tell him to use it. That's what I'm trying to say. It's already off the reservation. It's going off the agenda. So Chesed, like we say, let's say God said He created gold in this world in order for there to be a Mishkan. But then they take gold and they build an egel. So gold building a Mishkan is like an Atzilus says this is what gold was created for. In Beriyah, Yetzirah and Asiya, it already starts having its own agenda. Adam and Chava, before they ate from the tree, they were aligned, they were like Atzilus. Then what happened was they made a choice. And now they're not aligned anymore. Now they're so-called disconnected. It's like a misalignment between the machine and the plan. What's wrong? I mean, what else? What do you want to say? That Asiya is like Atzilus? I mean, what are you saying that? What does it mean that a world has Elikus and another world is not Elikus?
Yeah, because left is part of the plan, not only right.
Well, hold on, no. What are you saying? The plan is that we should align the world to Atzilus, not that this world should be distorted. You're trying to say is that distortion is also part of the plan. Nah, that's distortion is not part of the plan. The choice is part of the plan. Tzimtzum is Hepech HaRatzon. Tzimtzum is Shvil Hagili. This would be like saying the part of the plan is the father hides from the son, and the plan is that he should hide. No, the plan is that he should reveal him. And if the son makes a mistake and forgets to look, that's not part of the plan. That's called golus. Shrinta b'galusa. That's called pain. So it's a distortion is a distortion. Or else what you say is, well, might as well stay in golus. That's the plan, and that's it. Why are we trying to fix anything?
No, the plan is like to go out.
So I'm saying, so Beriyah is a distortion. L'gab Atzilus.
In order to be able to go out from golus, 1,000 goals.
We're not talking about that. We're talking about the bottom line is this world is a distortion. You're like saying is like this. A dysfunctional person is also part of the plan. No, it's not part of the plan. The part of the plan is that you shouldn't be dysfunctional. That you have a choice. We live in a world where God conceals. If Atzilus was not concealed, there would be no choice. So we're talking apples and oranges. You're telling me because God wants us to build it, that's why when we make a mistake, it's part of the plan. That's not what we're discussing here. It's totally irrelevant here. The bottom line is, there's a thing called golus. Golus is a distortion. It's a distortion. It's an aberration. What's natural is a Beis Hamikdash, Elikus in this world. When it's hidden, there's a purpose for it. But the distortion is not the purpose. Bottom line is, I'm explaining the four worlds. It's very simple. Atzilus is aligned to the vision. Beriyah is not the vision. The Beriyah is a step away, and there's a concealment where the Yesh begins to start manifesting, which will lead to the next stage, as Yetzirah, where it's fleshed out. There's more Yesh there. And Asiya is even more. Then you add the Gashmi, it's physical to all of this, and you have what we have, a world where
more body to the idea.
More substance.
Yeah.
More substance, and therefore, in a way, more distance from the vision. Possible. That's why you say.
The vision is a pure idea without any body or substance or anything to it.
Right. So now we come into this world. The fourth world is here. We have a world where the vision is concealed, and that's why people can go off on their own agenda. That's the point here. You asked a different question. Why he made the whole thing? Of course he made the whole thing for a purpose. But that doesn't mean there aren't levels. That doesn't mean something is healthy and something is not healthy.
That's what I'm talking exactly about.
But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about an unhealthy situation. Can we call it unhealthy? Or you want to call it healthy?
No, 100%.
So why are you calling it? Why don't you, and I'm trying to say is, by you saying that's the purpose, it makes it sound like it's healthy.
No, I didn't say it's the toughest in the sense that that's where we should go. But it's there for us to know that there is life, right?
But that's irrelevant to the discussion. When we talk that a neshama of Atzilus is a perfect neshama, and a neshama of Beriyah is not, that's what I'm talking about right now. That's the discussion right now. That Moshe Rabbeinu, when he was on earth, he was like Atzilus. He was aligned. When the Alter Rebbe would fall asleep Friday afternoon because he was aligned to the way it is Lamaila, that's what I'm talking about. Rabbi Hillel, it says, went to sleep because he didn't sense it He knew that's what you do. So neshama d'Atzilus is a superior neshama in the fact that it's aligned. Is there a purpose for other neshamas? Of course there is. But we're not talking about purpose. We're talking now the structure. We're talking about how do you define the four worlds. So the first world is aligned with the vision. Achdus. Eilama Achdus is Atzilus. Beriyah is no longer Achdus. It's already concealed. The unity that in the vision of God has been concealed. It's still a high world. There's a lot of spirituality there. And there's no free will in Beriyah. There's only free will in this physical world. But as far as the concealment of the energy in the container, I was just trying to explain the difference between spheres and worlds. So the spheres go through levels of gradation, of diminishing. That's how you define the worlds. In Atzilus, the spheres are aligned exactly the way. That's why Atzilus, the Klolus, is the 10 hidden spheres. But after the Tzimtzum, they now have substance. In the equivalent in the protistic worlds, in the microcosm would be Beriyah, is Klolus, is our Ak. So the Tzimtzum is like so-called between Atzilus and Beriyah. That concealment is necessary for the existence to manifest. Okay? Clear? Is there any problem with what I said?
No, I don't think we should. It's my concealment.
What's Beriyah the clothes? I just want to figure
Ak, Adam Kadman, generally speaking. I mean, close and protis is simply, as I said, microcosm. If you talk whole seder, histalshilus, big picture, so then Esespheres Agnuzes Atzilus the Klolus. Obviously, not Atzilus the Klolus doesn't mean it's Atzilus the protis is just another level. Yeah, but that's what it's called. It's all Shem HaMushal. It's only for us to understand it. But it has a similar properties. It's an emanation, it's not a creation. Beriyah the Klolus, Ak, would be called after the Tzimtzum, which is equivalent, if you want to talk about it on a smaller level, is Beriyah after Atzilus the Protis.
Beriyah after Atzilus?
There's Beriyah the Klolus and there's Beriyah the Protis.
Right, so Beriyah the Klolus is what?
Ak, Adam Kadman. This says everywhere. Yeah. This is it.
But in Protis it's higher than Atzilus, right?
No, in Protis, what, Beriyah the Klolus?
Yeah.
Of course it's higher.
It's higher than Atzilus.
Because then Atzilus Protis is Asiya Klolus. That's how it works. There's a maimer from the Tzemach Tzedek, Drush Gimel Yodam.
So even Yetzirah, the Klolus is higher than Atzilus.
Atzilus the Klolus is Akudim Nekudim usually. Yetzirah Klolus. Asiya Klolus is Atzilus Beriyah Yetzirah Asiya Protis.
And Kesser is...
Which Kesser? Kesser of Atzilus? The regel of Kesser of Atzilus Protis or Kesser of Atzilus Klolus? Klolus? That's above Atzilus. That's below the other worlds.
But that's still brooding.
Yeah, that's not.
Brooding is still...
You're talking Protis. If you're saying Protis, it's Protis. Then it's everything is on the detail.
It's a seder cloud.
Kesser, Atzilus is Asiya. Atzilus Beriyah Yetzirah Asiya Protis is Asiya Klolus. So Kesser is above that, right?
So, but no, still, is that Asiya's seder cloud?
If it's part of Atzilus, then it's part of Atzilus. There's no other way to interpret it.
So there could be a difference between Pnimis Kesser and external Kesser?
No, not necessarily. No, Pnimis Kesser is all of Atzilus Protis. That's where it is. And then you talk about the Kesser of Atzilus, of Beriyah Klolus, is the beginning of the Kav. That's what it says on top of the Kav. Top of Atzilus is Ke'ein Atika de Resha Galgalta. That's like the beginning of the Kav is like so-called Kesser of Beriyah, which comes from Malchus of Ein Sof. Malchus of Ein Sof is like Malchus of Atzilus, the Klolus, if you want to put it that way. So now we talk about the structure. So he says, just like there's a structure, histalshilus ma'alamata in the 10 spheres, same thing, histalshilus ma'alamata gam be'elmas. The same thing in the worlds, meaning in the dimensions, there's also a structure of higher and lower. Histalshilus ma'alamata basically means a structure. Best way to define it. A structure, which means, as soon as you say structure, it means it has parameters. Parameters means higher and lower. That's what he means in this context. He doesn't mean higher and lower as opposed to width and others. He means structure. That's what structure defines. You say something like he said before, Ein Sof HaPoshet, when energy is the divine energy before the Tzimtzum is seamless, there's no ma'alamata there. You can't say this is higher, this is lower. Everything is one. Ukidua, the Klolus histalshilus nifchen begimel madregas. As it's known that the whole histalshilus we translate as cosmic order, Histalshilus literally means chain. It comes from the word histalshilus. Histalshilus is a noun. Histalshilus is like a verb. So histalshilus means a chain. Histalshilus is the evolution of one link of the chain to the next. The reason histalshilus is used is because all the worlds are all connected like links. There's no disconnect. Even though there's a tzimtzum and there's concealments and there's diminishing and all kinds of stuff, and even pauses, but at the end of the day, histalshilus means that everything down here has a root all the way up. So you can identify literally a physical object and retrace its steps, which is of course critical to the whole interface, because if we can't trace it, then we're disconnected. However, like he says in Tanya several times, how far it goes down, you can have a chain. The only difference between a chain and this is that a chain, the first link and the next link, last link are the same substance. Here, as it goes down, the links change the personality. They become much more tangible, much more substantial. But in a way, you shake one link, you're shaking all the links. But in histalshilus, it comes down in lower, more and more diminished. But they're all linked.
The link is like doing a mitzvah, so everything gets affected.
Exactly correct, right?
This goes
It's like a ripple effect.
This goes all the way up to its spirits.
It goes all the way to Atzmus, because Atzmus chose to do this histalshilus. You can't say Atzmus is the root of histalshilus, because he's beyond being a root or a source, but his will is that it should be there. The Sava Kadosh Baruch Hu. Everything starts from there. You can't call it a structure. The structure doesn't exist there. There, it's Atzmus. There's no... Sorry? You do say histalshilus starts from tzimtzum. I said, he didn't ask me where it starts. He asked me whether it's rooted all the way to the top. And to say, in other words...
If you shake the chain, it could be that it doesn't go beyond the tzimtzum.
You could say that, but then the im tzedakta matiful bay. But so later we're going to learn that there's a thing called aveda tzedek kaveya, that he wants it to affect. How it affects, but definitely that there's a desire. The mitzvahs are misyachses ala atzmus, the Rebbe Rashab says. Mitzvahs don't stop by the tzimtzum. Existence stops by the tzimtzum. But what we do with existence, and we turn it into a godly thing, that doesn't stop. That's rooted all the way in the top. However, bottom line, histalshilus does not begin till the tzimtzum, that's for sure. You can't call seder histalshilus before the tzimtzum. You can just say that, like we said, that he envisions it, shir atzmei b'kayach, etc. So that's histalshilus. Okay?
Goes even before, right through tzimtzum.
I'm not sure what you're saying.
Adam
al-Elyon is Atzilus. The Adam. Adam is similar to above.
The whole sugi in some above, how you can chase everything all the way back.
This is also here. This whole thing is about this. This whole Ayin Beis started with Adam al-Elyon. That Atzilus is revealing that which is concealed. It's Adam al-Elyon. And then there's a part of Atzilus that's something new. In Samach Vav he also speaks the two things. Doesn't speak only one way. As a matter of fact, Samach Vav is less Adam al-Elyon than here. Samach Vav, the main focus there is that at the end of the day, it's beyond us. Here, he talks much more about... But bottom line is that Atzilus has both elements. Something that makes Adama, which makes it similar. That's the whole point. There's a whole discussion is literally about this. And the second thing is that it's Yashmayim. That's something new, something beyond. The bottom line is, we are infinitely distant from the essence and divine, and we have a relationship with it. And just really mastering both elements. They do not compromise each other. And you just have to remember that. This paradox is reality. You're never going to get a solution to that. There's a distance that we have from Atzmus and from Elokus. That's the Er HaBli. That's why we need to know that as much as Atzilus is Elokus, it's still as distant as Atzilus is from Asiya. Atzilus is more distant from Ein Sof. And then there's another side. God desired and chose to create some similarity, that we can have a Gilead Helen, we can integrate godliness. In other words, we don't have to break ourselves. That's what we've been discussing. That's the interface. The ultimate interface is that we can contain it, at the same time realize it's beyond us. That's what a real relationship is about anyway. That's Av and Yira. The bottom line is there's a closeness and integration, intimacy, and there's a distance, a mystery. And even last chapter we spoke about the mystery that b'chayein you can't see God. B'misasin, because what is this, a game? It's not a game. It's because when you're too much defined by your parameters, you can't completely appreciate the mystery. When you appreciate the mystery, it's not inside your containers. So the challenge is, how do you have both? How do you maintain the mystery and the awe of something beyond us and still make it part and parcel of who we are? It's the whole Ayin Beis, whole Chassidus, whole Kabbalah is just to achieve that. That's why you need all this. If you got that, you don't need to. If we were just avodim, servants, slaves to serve God, so then God tells us do these mitzvahs and do them. Shabbos, kashrus, that's it. But He wants a relationship. He created a human being in the divine image. Take away these few psukim, what I'm going to say now. Take away that Adam is nivra b'tzelem Elokim. Take away v'yadaita, the mitzvahs of v'yadaita and v'ahafta. And just have mitzvahs maisis, we can easily explain that we are just servants to serve a master.
A lot of Yidden don't have no chassidus would say that.
A lot of people with chassidus also say it. And maybe they don't have chassidus. Okay, but chassidus didn't mechadish it. Chassidus explains it.
Yeah, any Yid in the street will tell you that, where we have to just do mitzvahs, the Rebbe wants us to do it, and that's it.
Okay, so what do you want me to say?
Let's just elaborate on it, yeah.
No, the point being is that chassidus is not mechadish. Chassidus explains it. The whole reason is the primus atera is, look, first of all, God gave us all this Torah. He gave us primus atera and chassidus. Not necessarily in these aces, but the concepts are there. The relationship is there. There's a relationship with God. That's the bottom line, a partnership. And for that to be effective, the only way to do it is, that's why we're blessed with seichel. That's why we're blessed with these mitzvahs to use our seichel. That's why it's a mitzvah to know God. You can easily argue. That whole argument in Sheresh Mitzvah Tefillah, where the Rishon, the Rivash, where he says, to the Mekubal, about Kabbalah. Kabbalah is medayik all the names and shemus and the levels. He says, Ani mizbal l'daze hatinuk. I daven according to the way a simple child davens. There's a God, and that's it. And we don't negate that. The Rebbe quotes that very often. We don't negate that, because God forbid you don't daven to histalshilus, you don't daven to spheres, you daven to God. But God also wanted a relationship. So therefore God manifested in a structure, so to speak. So you have how God functions through chesed, through gvura. That's the whole thing with the spheres. The Kabbalists argue or try to do...
Or dryer, Cohen.
The structure, so therefore, that's what all the Kabbalists argue. That's where the three opinions about the spheres. Are the spheres in the Eir? Are the spheres in the Kalim? Or the ultimate reconciliation that they're both in the Eir and the Kalim? That's all about this discussion, about how much can you attribute to God attributes. The machlek is between the Maral and the Rambam. Can you say who Amad, who Yideya? The God is, or is God beyond Das? So it's not simple. This is this whole discussion in Ayin Beis too. Ayin Beis is going with the approach which is the ultimate reconciliation, the final approach of the Arizal and so on. That there's spheres in the energy as well. That means that makes the unity much greater. But the dilemma and the way we resolve it is because obviously it's only relative to containers. It becomes really substantial. But the bottom line is, going back to something I've said, I'll just say it again, maybe it has to be repeated as many times. The whole point is integration of a structure with something which is beyond structure, which initially does not make sense to a mind like ours because it's not rational. It's a contradiction. How could structure connect to not structure? Simple as that. And the answer is it could, because the one that created both structure and non-structure is beyond both. So even he's not limited to non-structure either. But that's from God's point of view. The question is, how do we get there? So there you go through all the examples. We're students that begin with a tzimtzum. We begin with 0. But through that we climb the steps, step by step by step, till we get to the point where we integrate more and more. And still there always remains beyond. Even L'asad Love, when it says, V'nig l'kved Hashem, v'ro kol basar Yaakov. The Rebbe brings this out from Rabbi Levik. He says, what will be L'asad? So it's a contradiction. That's the expression. One person will not teach another friend. Because all of you, because they all will know me, God. From small to from young to old. So they won't teach each other, but there'll be a katan gadol. How does this work? The answer is because when Mashiach comes in the highest levels, it's not going to eliminate gradations, Milo Mata, talking about that. It's still going to be there. The only thing then is everybody will have a connection straight to the essence. That's Kulim Yedesi. But that will manifest and still in Ketana V'Agdelim. That's why we'll have Mashiach Yilamad Kol Am Kulei. Mashiach will teach. We'll be learning Torah, but we'll constantly be elevating. It won't be we all come now to a static place and everyone is equalized and that's it. The difference is then there won't be good and evil. In good itself, there's levels. Saliyas in Kedusha itself, as the Alter Rebbe writes in Simon Chavav, the end of Gersa Kedesh. Absolutely. No, but then it'll be from good to better, and it's Ad Ein Sof. In other words, structure remains. The point I'm saying is that's the whole dilemma. Now, when you look at this properly, and slowly as you begin to acclimate yourself to this, it becomes it's not as paradox. In the beginning, it sounds like a paradox, but it's not a paradox. You come to learn that logic, that our limited logic is the problem, not the concept. Our limited logic can't understand: is it a table or is it godliness? We can't understand how it could be both. Is it finite or infinite? But by learning, you start realizing that's this whole. Even this discussion, you start seeing, without all the details. What we learned in one way, one chiddush right away that teaches you is, don't think in tangible terms. Something can be sublime, and then you learn something can be even more sublime. Like he keeps saying, Eses is blima. But then he says that's only relative to the containers. And then when you go higher, there's pshitus mamish. Right there, he's training us to think in ways that we would not think. On our own, we think, what do you mean? It's either tangible or it's not tangible. Here, right away, you have three things. It's tangible, containers are tangible. Is it tangible or not? The answer is, well, when outside of the containers, it's not so tangible. In the containers, it's more tangible. Even then, it's not completely tangible. Then out of the containers, three levels. All this is training us, besides to know the facts, it's training us to think like this. In other words, if this was done right, and we really learned it again and again, you actually think differently. If you have let's say you represent Esesfiras Agnuzas, I'll represent Esesfiras after the Tzimtzum, before the containers. You represent as they are in the containers. We would have three different languages. It would be almost like three different presentations of what the spheres feel like. You would be talking about the spheres as they're united in the source. What is the vision? I would be talking about, as he explained it, how they're already they're already distinct, but they're still under the influence. So each level is a level in Aveda, actually, because it's training you to think like that. Now, obviously, we go from the bottom up. It's much easier for us to relate to Eris and Kalim than Eris outside of Kalim, obviously. And even in Kalim, that's still Atzilus. We didn't even get to Asiya Gashmis. But my point is, the whole point here is to help train us to think in more sublime levels. You talk about application, I'll give you another example. Application is how you're sensitive to other people. When you look at somebody, you see a Keli, you're the least sensitive. You'll see whatever I see, what you see is what you get. Like the Gemara says, Kama Muchur Kelizeh. An ugly person. Who said that? It was anyway, it was... so he says, he saw an ugly person. So he answers the Tana, I think it's a Tana. He says to him, Leich Lu'man Shasani. You say, I'm ugly. Go to my craft, the craftsman that shaped me. And the Gemara tells us this. It's just like an insulting statement. Why would the Gemara tell us? Because it's important to know that anyone can get trapped on the Keli level. And in truth, you start looking 1 second. Yeah, the Uman Shasani, all of us have ugly stuff on the outside. You start looking deeper. The whole point is, as you understand subtlety, you start realizing there's no such thing as just what you see is what you get. Everything has more to it. Everything. There's no such thing, not a table, nothing. Modern physics, it's a given. There's no longer such a thing as just what you see. A table is not a table. A table is made up of elements and molecules and atoms and subatomic particles. A table is just what we call the outer shell of all that. That's the bottom line. The Chassidus Torah always taught that. That's the whole.
It's been saying that for years.
Yeah, and energy. Except we don't turn it into a scientific model. But and for us the goal is to reveal that energy. But the concept of looking at things as energy instead of as bodies is essentially looking at an air instead of a keli. And then you climb the ladder of the energy. So bottom line, going back to histalshilus is that chain. Just wanted to explain that word. So he says, the close histalshilus nifchen begimel madregas. Nifchen means it's measured by, it's the nifchen, the bechina.
It's categorized.
Okay.
It's categorized?
Yeah.
When you say bechina means sometimes a level. Bechina is also a test, like in school. When we had bechinas, we didn't like bechinas. So whenever I saw bechinas mechassid, I said, oh no, another test. In a way, it is a test. But no, nifchan means, you'd say categorized. It could be measured by, defined by, there's a lot of words you could use. It basically means It's more than just, I think, categorized. Nifchen means it's almost like the litmus test. It's not test. It's not test. Definitely not test. Nifchen means it's measured by, defined by, qualified, categorized by, qualified by. It's all the correct words. The idea is the same. Nifchen begim madregas. Okay, by 3 levels. Gimel elam is biyah. There are 3 worlds of biyah. In other words, it's not just the histalshilus happens to have 3 worlds. It's defined by these 3 worlds. It's categorized. This is in other words, if you would say, for example, you'd say, let's see here, a bookshelf. A bookshelf is nifchen by the shelves that it has. That's it. It's inherent to the bookshelf. It's not just a technical aside. So gimel elms. What are the gimel elms? Biyah. That's why I explained that there are 3 levels. Now here again, the Adam, back to the Adam, which is created in the image of the divine. He's divided, nechlak, he breaks down into 3 parts, 3 general components. Yeah, it's quite intentional. Because he's talking about the structure, mamish, the building, the creation. What are the gimel chalak? Heim bekeches nafshi v'heim beguf. I mean, this is like, the beautiful depiction of the whole image. Both in the faculties of the soul, a person breaks into 3, and in the physical body. What are they? They in reish, guf, v'regel. The head, the body, and the legs. Let me just explain what that means. Reish means the whole head, this part. Basically, if you look at a person, there's the head till here, there's the torso, which means guf, which would be everything from here till the midsection, and then the legs is everything below. So it's really 3 parts, and it's pretty obvious. The Mishkan is created in that way, the same image. You have the Kodesh Kodashim, the Kodesh, and the El Moed. That's the structure. Yeah, the Ulam, yeah. And this says in Sfarim, this is specific. So that's the thing. But the Beregel in general, the legs are where in the regel you have the power to walk, which is the lowest, the ultimate, the utter lowest of all the faculties of the soul. And even though walking is also for the need of the soul. Let's say soul here doesn't really mean soul in the spiritual sense. Soul means for life. For the life, for a person to be alive. And there's actually a virtue, a quality to the walking. It carries the head and hold and maimed and puts it in and makes sure it's steady. It's make sure it's stand upright, right? That it's upright. Nevertheless, it's still the lowest of faculties. So he's explaining what means lowest. Lowest doesn't mean it's not necessary. Lowest doesn't mean that it's not vital. Lowest means in gili, in pure measure of volume, of intensity, of divine, of spiritual energy, soul energy, it has the least. Compared, for example, to the brain, to the mind. The mind, and this is even medically, scientifically, the most heat goes out of the mind, the brain, the head. Even though the head is less than a third of the body, I think 80% of the heat is released through the head, because the head is like the hard drive. It overheats.
That's when they call it. You should wear a hat.
Like look at a computer by the hard drive, because that's where that's the central nervous system. They have all the fans, even though it's only one part. They have fans all over. I mean, you have another fan, but that's the main part because that overheats. Wherever there's a lot of energy, there's always a lot of things going on. So the legs are necessary. So that's what he's explaining. We're not talking about necessity here. We're talking about revelation. No, but structure of existence is defined by how revealed something is and how concealed it is. Not by how necessary. I want to just reiterate that. Necessity has nothing to do with this issue. And maybe it's irrelevant to what I said before to you when you were asking about the vision. We're not talking about the purpose of Beriyah, Yetzirah, and Asiya. We're talking about pure revelation. If you were to measure it, where is Elokus revealed? Beis Hamikdash. Outside of Beis Hamikdash, it's not so revealed. Yeah, of course, Dira B'Tachtenim dictates that in outside of the Beis Hamikdash you can have higher revelations, but we're talking about pure. If you were to measure on a scale, revelation, that's structure. Take away this, what I just said now, you have no structure. It's all leading this, all this is coming to explain how the Kav and Er Primi are all about levels. And the levels are inherent to the structure. You don't have levels, you destroy the structure. So structure is inherently defined by levels. One level, next level, higher, lower. That's why he's making this emphasis. B'miyut hagili b'yeser. If you remember in the last chapter when he spoke about the numbers, he said higher is a greater volume. Interesting. He said lo yishem b'bchinas misped, actually b'chinas ribi ha'er. Middle of the last chapter. When you say numbers are higher above by the eight, it's not because of the more numbers. We don't care about the single numbers. We're talking about more volume, more power. Okay. Ubeguf meir es hanefesh yeser. That's the regel. Now he's working his way up in the second part of the body, which is the guf. Even though guf in general means the whole, you say guf adam, you can mean head to toe. But many things in Torah, you have a shem, what's called a shem what's the word? Shem hamin, shem haprati. Like this keichav is a shem klali, all stars are called keichav. But then there's an actual star called keichav. You have many examples of this, where you have seder taris, and you have mesechta taris, or kachin. Seder kachin, mesechta. No, there's no mesechta kachin, mesechta taris. In other words, there's a name for it. Is it shem klali, shem haprati, I think, huh?
In New York, you have it as a state, and you have it as a city.
Yeah, right. So you also have, so when you say guf here, specifically he's talking about the middle part now. Now, the guf meir nefesh yeser. In the guf, you have more, again, not necessity, but more, there's more abundance of the spirit of life. Shahari beguf hena hayvarim apnimim. Because in the body, in this part, in the torso basically, you have the internal organs, which the feet don't have. Now let me explain. The feet have nerves, and they have veins, and they have arteries, and again, it's central to life. But technically speaking, God forbid, you could amputate a foot and still be alive. You can't amputate a heart. So right there it tells you one has more of a life force. So he says like this. So he says the life force is dependent on them. Like for example, the heart and the lungs. Right? That's all within the chest. It's called the guf. The gam hamidah, that's the guf. And now he's talking the keiches hanefesh. Remember, he says both in keiches and in the body, both in the faculties and in the body. So gam hamidah shebenefesh mishkanam belev. The emotions in the heart rest. The emotions in the spirit rest in the heart. And even the outer extremities in the guf, they also have more abundant spirit and energy.
Is the spleen and the liver.
Well, he's saying that he's going to say the yad, actually, the real outer, even the arms. Because you could argue the arms are like the legs. He's being all the way the outer. Those are still inner. They may not be as vital. Remember, in Ma'ila Mata, it's not just Reish Guf Regel. In the guf itself, there's Ma'ila Mata too. Okay, so what is he saying? Kumei biyad, like shaboy. I'm sorry, kumei biyad, like the arm. Shaboy kayach hatanua, lichtev l'tzayir dover lasses be'ez malacha. Which has within it, the reg is kayach hahiluch, the power to walk. There it has the power to movement. Kayach hatanua means literally movement, but he means more than just movement. He means the movement that's a deliberate movement. Lichtev to write, to draw. L'tzayir dover, to paint, to draw an image. Or to do any particular work that we do with our hands, our arms. This kayach, etzem kayach, not just what you accomplish with it. The kayach itself, the faculty itself, is superior and higher than the power to walk. Even though what you do with your hand is also just kayach. It's like walking is what's walking. Walking doesn't have any emotions in it necessarily or intelligence. It's just the act of a certain physical act. So even though same thing is with the hand, the arms, when they write, paint, or do a work or do any function, nevertheless it's still superior. It's higher than in revelation to the power of walking in the legs, in the leg. Additionally, it also has some manifestation of seichel. Now, just for the record, it's important to go back to very early chapters where he discusses this in detail. He's going to let's see what he's going to say here, but briefly, he said before even speaking about the histalshilus b'seichel, he's essentially saying, you could also see it. To write, to paint, to craftsman, someone that does something with his hands. Let's even talk about it's technical. It's definitely a more refined action than walking. Because walking, number one, is millions of people can walk the same way. Yeah, and you don't need any particular craftsmanship. Whereas, for example, a carpenter or an artist.
For example, an animal could walk and he doesn't, but he can't use his hands to write or to draw.
Yeah, well, they have today. I was going to mention about they train people that use legs to, elephants to draw, but that's already superimposed and it's not natural. And even when you do that, it's not going to be exactly. You're not going to write a magnum opus with your toes. It's more of a trick. Huh?
What about ballet?
What?
Ballet, something like that.
Dancing. He brings dancing earlier. Dancing he says there's a chokhmah in the leg, but generally speaking, the leg doesn't not have as much. Like the idea of writing books or writing or painting is definitely the hand is much more of a keli to seichel than the legs are. The legs doesn't mean they're completely devoid. Of course, you can teach someone to dance until. Huh?
In other words, they both have seichel.
No one has seichel. Seichel manifests within them, but because the yad is more refined, the more seichel manifests in it. That's the bottom line.
They both have.
Did you hear what I just said?
Yes, they both have histalshilus and seichel, but the hand has more fine motor skill. They're able to express it in detail.
No, that's not what it's the point. The whole point of this is the opposite. Because the hand is more refined, therefore it generates much more powerful energy from the mind and from the soul. That's what he's saying here. That more refined, just like bina doesn't manifest as well as chokhmah. The same thing. A leg is more crass and coarse than an arm. And arms are more refined. That's why they're able to do so. The fact is that it's also closer to it's the reason that the legs are the most distant. The primary role of legs, and the Rebbe speaks in many sikhs when he speaks about talucha, is for us to maneuver and navigate this world. That's why the bottom of the feet are very tough. They can buffer blows and stuff like that. It's not the role of the arms. You don't walk on your hands. Of course, you could train someone to walk on his hands. We're talking about what's most natural and also what's most conducive. So, of course, there's a certain wisdom you can teach someone how to dance. You can teach them how to use their legs in a way. There are people who are tightrope walkers. It's also the legs. It's not only the legs. The point, however, is what's the primary. So, bottom line is he's saying that the arms, even the mice of them, is superior to the. Now, this I said, we have to refer back to the early chapters, chapter 2 and 3, primarily. This thing is discussed more at length. He brings dancing there, by the way. So now he says also that in the arms you have histalshilus seichel. That's the guf. So the guf both have the inner organs and even the outer extremities also are more refined, and therefore there's a higher level of energy there. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped a line. And even on the power to walk, there's also some manifestation of seichel. And you can say even more if someone knows how to dance. You can't compare it at all. It's not comparable at all comparable to the energy of the seichel that manifests in the power of movement of the arm. Like it says elsewhere. That's guf. Now we go to the head, reish. And the head, the spirit, the life force, the energy of the life force radiates more abundantly. B'dibu yeser. Tagam de betzim chayes hanefesh. Haresh v'alev shavin, even though in the essential life force, the head and the heart are equal. In other places, in Chassidus actually talks about whether a person can live without a heart or without a head. So as you can say, you can live without a heart a few more minutes than you can without a brain. The Rebbe has a whole thing from Chacham Tzvi, Shuvas Chacham Tzvi on this topic. But practically speaking, but for all practical purposes, it's not for long. Even if there's a distinction, a few minutes. In Masechta Seita, actually talks about Egla Rufa, so it talks about if you find, Egla Rufa is where God forbid, a dead person, the city that's closest to it has to bring a kapara. They're responsible. What happens if you meet him right? What happens if he's right in the middle? So the Gemara gives in the scenario, what happens if his body is closer to one city and his head to another? So in Pashtus it means that the head rolled away. But it says there that sometimes the opposite happens. Yeah, sometimes. Right, so sometimes it could be that the body, that in other words, the head actually didn't roll away, because the Pashtus should say is, if you see a body, there's a whole head, it means the body died here, and then the head rolled there. But to say the opposite would mean that the body has power of its own to move away after the head was severed, God forbid. So bottom line is, but there is a scenario like that. So that's a big question. How could, because in Likkutei Torah, he brings rosh. So there could be the answer is reflexive or other things that are possible.
Thing is kosher.
Could be running, yeah.
Not his rosh, it's dead. Even though it's still.
What do you mean?
Not his rosh. Cut off the head.
It's
still moving, it's dead.
Yeah. Anyway, but for all practical purposes, the etzem chayes nefesh harosh v'alev shavit. They're generally speaking, the head and the heart are equal. M'kol mokim, so that's a question. If that's the case, then essentially the gili chayes nefesh in the lev is equal to the head. And we're saying here in the rosh, it's higher.
This goes back to the whole discussion about when is the moment of death. Determine if it's brain dead or...
Yeah. Well, the us b'chlal p'teit, it's the chetim. Not even based on mind or heart. Based on breath. Which is also, some say, is connected to the heart. It's relevant to heart transplants. Okay, anyway. Yeah. Because you can't, so they have, there's a whole parsha. So the answer is, so yes, even if you say the life force is dependent on the ration and the heart and mind equally, but the keiches are not equal. The faculty of the mind and the faculty of emotions are not equal. Because in the head you have the revelation of intelligence. And all the superior senses. What he means here is sight, sound, ear to see, to hear, to taste. All that's in the rosh, which you don't have in the guf, in the body. Let me just finish the sentences. Like seeing, like hearing. So we see from this that the primary revelation of the life force is in the rosh, meaning in the head, and in the head itself, primarily in the brain, in the mind within the head, the brain inside the head. Yeah. What do you want?
The life force is equal everywhere, and this is more begila. I was wondering why you picked out rosh.
Because it's not. No, it's not. We're not talking about the life force being equal everywhere. We said that before. That even the legs, he said, are also. He said very loud and clear before. We're talking about because you can't live without a heart. You can live without legs, for example. You can live without a kidney.
It can't be that the life force is equal with the leg and the heart. It can't be that it's equal.
No. The life force can be equal, as in it means everything is alive when it's alive, but it doesn't mean it's dependent on. It means the nefesh travels through the heart and mind more than it does through the legs, because the proof is you take those away, life stops. You take away the legs or other parts of the body, it doesn't. That's what he's saying here. Yeah. He says, so one thing he's talking definitely about revelation, but more than revelation, he's even talking about more quality. It's not just quantitative; it's also quality energy, life energy, life soul. One second here. He's asking like a question, like an avodah.
I think he just finished the malation.
Now he's continuing. He's like asking a question. And what about Rusa Deliba? Rusa Deliba is not a small matter. He said before, for example, Rusa Deliba is the atzmis, the essential connection, the will of the heart. He's talking Aveda now. is specifically in the heart. Rusa Deliba, you could say, is a very powerful force. This has within it.
It's a powerful force, and it might be equal to the force that's in the light, right?
I mean, let's see. That's. It has within it two ways, two methods. There's two ways to look at this. One is that there's a rusa deliba, an awakening, a will in the heart, which is the desire, like he said before, rusa deliba on top of page Nun Vov, is tefes, mili b'shamayim, that this will in the heart comes also through his bonus shebemeich, through a contemplation in the mind. However, for it to make such a rusa deliba, that is bonus, that contemplation is in divine infinite light that's higher than the whole structure, cosmic order, like it says elsewhere. The second is that there's a level of rusa deliba that does not come at all through contemplation, but it comes from the etzem, from the essence of the soul. Yeah. According to the second way. This is almost like the answer. This is, however, the essential nakuda, this essential point in the soul that's higher altogether than faculties. Shehi nechozes belev, that is manifests, is grasped, nechozes is one second. And it's higher than all the faculties of Commercial Custom. Let's read, we'll see where it's going to go. Like it says elsewhere. That's higher than Keches, which is not what we're discussing here. However, when you talk about the faculties of the spirit, of the soul, so Rusa Deliba is not a contradiction, because we're not talking about Keches HaNefesh. You're not talking about the natural flow of a human being. I mean, as soon as I saw Rusa Deliba, I was thinking it's Aveda. Rusa Deliba is already Aveda. Even if it comes from the Etzem HaNeshama, that's like, but he's qualifying everything. It's unbelievable. Even qualifying that. Even Rusa Deliba. Perhaps who would bring up Rusa Deliba? We're talking here about the human functions, which is just walking with your creatures. But by the Rebbe Rashab, Rusa Deliba is a reality just like walking with your feet. Instead, it's part of the reality. You got to consider it's in the lev. So the chayre, it's higher. So the first thing he says, that too comes from the mind through the contemplation, and even the part that's etzem, that's higher. You're talking totally higher than faculties. But within the structure of faculties, the primary revelation of the manifest revelation and revelation of the spirit is in the head. Umitzad hakelim ve'evri haguf. And from the perspective of Mitzad, and from the perspective of the containers, ve'evri haguf, and the organs of the body, hari hareish, the head, hu achelik hayeser katan shebeguf. The head is the smallest part of the body. He's not talking here, you'll see here, how what he's talking before, more kalim, less energy. So direct proportion, or disproportion, basically goes like this. So there's more intensity, energy, like he said with Chachma. When the containers are smaller or more sublime, you have more energy. So now he's going to that part. So all this we spoke about was Ma'lo Mata, and the structure of the human body was in the energy level. You talk about containers, the exact opposite. The legs are going to be the largest part of the body, almost half. The goof is smaller, but yet bigger than the reish, which has the most power in it. Yeah, exactly. So mitzad the kelim, yeah. Yeah.
That was the whole thing here is a faculty kind of discussion, level of how much of this neshama faculties are revealing themselves in certain parts, or we talk it because you brought all the time the example of life and death also. Like, take away a head, you cannot. Take away a foot, God forbid, you can. So how is the revelation of faculties in a kli what's Tomit level?
Two separate things. I would say both are correct. First of all, let's start with just revelation. In the legs, you have less revealed soul energy than in the head.
beyond faculty level of neshama.
I'm talking.
That's in chayus?
No, not talking about chayes. I'm talking about faculty now.
Faculty.
Yeah. And for legs, it's just basically revealing the ability to walk.
Okay.
It's not as sophisticated. It's not as refined. Simple as that. The arms are more refined. The arms could write. They could paint. That's on that level. Yeah. Then there's another thing. That there are organs that are vital for life. Like that's what he brings. That's achayis nefesh v'rosh v'regel shovin. There seemingly there are organs that are actually. He didn't spell out about life and death, but it's apparent that some things are more vital. That just was explaining it that way. That's not what he's focusing on here, but it's definitely a reflection of the same idea. It's two separate things. It's not a contradiction. Maybe it's Haba Italia, but the bottom line is however you twist it, there is a proof that the mind and the heart have more higher energy is the fact that you can't live without them. That definitely proves it. But it's not the only proof. It's also by the fact that the mind is a more refined way of expression, a refined faculty. That's all. It was more what I used as an example, more than what he says. It's a little hinted when he says etzem. When he says that the etzem chayes hanefesh hadosh v'gul lev shovin. That's mashman life, not just because he's not talking about shovin, that the mind and the heart. Remember, he said earlier that the mind is more superior than emotions. Where's that?
Like the sixth line from the top, son of life.
From the top of what?
The last three lines, the words.
Where? Which line? Oh, yeah. Okay. He did say, yeah. He also said that. Okay. So then finished. And then, okay, I thought I would. So both things are correct, that's all. It's two different elements. But they both demonstrate the same thing. Okay. So now he's going to the opposite, to the kelim. So, here we go. So it's the smallest part of the body. V'chelik haguf gadol, mimenu, v'chelik haraglayim, yesib gadol. And the part of the guf is even greater, larger than the head. And the legs, v'chelik haraglayim, and the part that are the legs, is even bigger. So we see from this, harisha kelim, haregel hu beribui hakelim, yesib harosh. Now there's Hari Shabbat Kelim on the level of containers. Haregel hu beribui hakelim yesem harosh. So on the level of containers, the legs are more abundant, meaning larger, simply larger. It doesn't mean numbers of containers. It means larger in physical, in the size, in volume. Like you spoke before about the numbers. More than the head. When you talk from the energy level, the bereish meir era nefesh beribui beguf mismayet ha'er u'beregel mismayet b'yesem. When you talk from the energy level, it's the opposite. In the head, it radiates in abundance, the spirit, the energy of the spirit. In the body, it's diminished, the energy. And the regel, it's diminished even further. This is all in the body. Now he's going back to say the histalshilus. He's talked about nifchim begimel madregas elemus. So all this was to explain how the structure of existence is defined by three levels. The same thing is example. This is very similar, by the way, to the chapters 33. Was the Keiches HaNefesh, and then he said, "V'adugma b'zeh," understand Lamaila. Here, it's both in the same chapter. He's bringing the body, person, meaning our life force, and well, it explains, or it's but the same thing as example above. The Beis Elmas, the Gimel Elmas, beyond the three worlds of Beriyah, Yetzirah and Asiya. The Be'elam HaBeriyah, that's rosh, Meir Adayin Gila. In the Elam HaBeriyah, which is already the rosh, the head. I'm saying it still radiates there a revelation of energy. Being that the Elam HaBeriyah is the first yesh, it's the first substantial creation. That was created from the ayin, from the substanceless divine energy. Meir Shamadayin Gili Ha'ayin. So it still radiates there a revelation from that substanceless place. That's why Beriyah, the world of Beriyah, is called Cheshach, darkness. That we say in davening, Yetzirah and Asiya. He shaped light and he created Cheshach. So we see that Beriyah is Cheshach and Yetzirah is Eir. Doesn't mean Eir is more revelation, it means more revealed. Beriyah is Chemel. Since in Beriyah irradiates a higher energy, is considered darkness and concealment compared to lower worlds. Yeah, I know you would type the other way around, but that's what he's saying. Because remember, when you go like this, Atzilus is the most air. Then comes Beriyah. So Beriyah is the Chemer. Without the Tzura is still a dark place, in the sense you can't really see yet what it's going to be. One way to explain it. But bottom line here is it's Gili Eir. Then comes the next world. Yetzirah she'ein ha'er sham begili kol kach. And the world of Yetzirah with energy is not as revealed as in Beriyah. Has a b'chinas er v'gil gabi lamata. That you call Yetzirah Eir. Because now the energy is more diminished. Think from the perspective of the student. Beriyah is concealed, and Yetzirah, being that it's more diminished light, so the student, the recipient, compared to the lamata, there's more Eir and Gili, there's more revelation. Or think of it like this, like I mentioned before with the structure. You build a building, once you start shaping it, the recipient, meaning the viewer, can start seeing what the building is like. From the perspective of the artist or the vision or the architect, he sees it already in the vision before. But from the perspective of an outsider, Yetzirah is more revealed what the plan is than, like you look at buildings, you see in the early stages they all look alike, a foundation and a skeleton. When it starts fleshing out, it's more revealing to us because it's more concealing of what's going on above. It's less revelation, it's lower. Here we go. But from the perspective of containers, it's the opposite. The Beriyah b'chinas miyat hakelim, and Beriyah is lesser containers. And Yetzirah is more abundant, many containers. Like it's known that Beriyah and Yetzirah are the two worlds of machshava and dibur, thought and speech. And we see that what you think about in your mind, in your thoughts, in miyud zman, in a shorter moment time, and with less words, less letters, that same machshava, that same thought, when it comes and was expressed in speech, it takes longer time and more letters necessary. So there you go. More energy, less containers. Container both in time and in actual words, letters used. And also the letters of thought are more sublime, are spiritual letters, meaning ethereal letters. They don't have the same substance, same tangibility like speaking letters. Because we see they're not felt by an outside person. By contrast, letters from speech, another person sends them. I speak right now, you hear my words. It's still, compared to action, written words, it's more ethereal, but compared to thought, what I was thinking in my mind, it's more tangible. The Beriyah, see how much he's spelling it out, it's like, it's beautiful. Same thing, the kelim, the containers of Beriyah, they're lesser containers, like machshava, lesser time, lesser letters. What does it mean, kelim? It means less yeshus, sumitzias, less substance, less self. Like a machshava, in a way, because when you hear words that say speaking, there's the tangibility of it means there's a recognition of somebody there. So there's more yesh involved here. So it's miyat hayeshus, it's a diminished, it's a lesserness of yeshus and mitzias. Of yeshus, I would say, is the sense of your ego, and mitzias is just your being. So, maybe yeshus is gavra and mitzias is chefza. Maybe the other way around. Okay. And Yetzirah you have the is the level of many containers, meaning much yeshus and mitzias, relatively speaking. This is the reason that Yecheskel, the prophet, elaborated about the Merkava, the vision he had of the chariot, the divine chariot, the supernal chariot. And Yeshaya, the prophet, Isaiah, right, did not elaborate that much. If you can pick up the ideas of sublime ideas of Eir and this, you could figure out that Yecheskel and Yeshaya. Why? That's because Yecheskel saw the Merkava, he saw the chariot, he saw this vision of his, of the world of Yetzirah, where there's many containers. Okay, that's why he elaborates about it. Yeshaya saw the vision of the chariot of Beriyah, which is what fewer containers, and that's why his description is a shorter one. That's from the Kalim point of view, the Arichas, how much they talk about it. From the perspective of the energy, in Beriyah, on the contrary, radiates abundant energy, and Yetzirah diminished energy. He said that before too. That one is dependent on the other. He said that on page Nun Ches, if I recall. I was trying to figure out what it meant, the Ha'B'Ha'Talya there. But now, page Nun Zayin? Where is it? It's Nun Ches. Ha'B'Ha'Talya. So what's the Ha'B'Ha'Talya? It goes like this here. The bottom of Nun Ches, 58. The Keshakelim B'chinas Miyut, that when the containers are few, Shehein Kelim Yetzirah Eir, meaning that they're like containers, they're more receptive to the energy. It radiates in them abundance of energy. And when there's abundant containers, the air gets diminished. It's the same Ha'B'Ha'Talya that he said before. It's almost word for word, actually. I just like to make the comparisons. Yeah, exactly the same thing. It's interesting. It's all from the containers. He's not saying that when the energy is more, the containers are less. He's saying that the containers are more. Okay. And now he's talking klolos elements. This is pratis. Talking about Silas the klolos pratis. Same. Also the general worlds, the macrocosm, they also divide into three levels. General. Adam the Beriyah the klolos, which, as I mentioned, is Adam Kadmon, the general Adam the Beriyah, man of Beriyah. Adam is essentially the part of Adam Yetzirah, and the man of Yetzirah, which is usually Akudim and Akudim. Sometimes it's also Atik and Arich, that Tzemach Tzedek writes. And Adam Asiya, which is Abiyah HaPratim. So also they break into three. He just had that. So you have the whole picture here. Reish, Guf, and Regel. The interesting thing, he didn't talk about Asiya. He only talked about Beriyah Yetzirah primarily. But essentially, Beriyah is like the rosh, Yetzirah is like the guf, and the regel is Asiya.
So what's the big
like the Asiya. Generally speaking, Atzilus the Klolos is Lifnei HaTzimtzum. He's not mentioning that at all. We're not talking about that. Beriyah the Klolos is
the
last is. Let's talk about first Pratim. Beriyah Yetzirah say Pratim. You got that?
Yeah.
Reish, Guf, Regel. He doesn't say that even specifically, Reish, Guf, Regel. He just compared the three.
Right.
And he basically explained Beriyah Yetzirah, not Asiya. Yetzirah with Cheshach. Then comes the same thing. Whatever you say about Beriyah Yetzirah, Asiya, Pratim, now you can say, he says, also in general, the whole structure is Beriyah the Klolos. I said is Ak. Adam Kadmon is Beriyah the Klolos. It's the whole. Yetzirah the Klolos is usually Akudim Nekudim. Sometimes it's Atik and Arich. Of Yetzirah is the Pratis. And then Atzilus, Beriyah Yetzirah, Asiya, Pratim is Asiya Pratis.
What's the thing of Beriyah?
Oh, Adam Kadmon. How many?
Adam Kadmon.
Ak is Beriyah the Klolos. That's what it says. There's a mime from Tzemach Tzedek called Drush Gimel Mini Adam. It discusses at length. The whole mime is just on this.
We can have a whole thing later on.
Yeah, I'm sure. The whole Maimer. He says it clearly, right? It's printed in Parsha Bolok. He says like this. I'll just read to you, right? He says right in the beginning. He says like this. It's a Tzemach Tzedek. It's Alter Rebbe's Maimer with the Tzemach Tzedek's elaboration. He says like this. He says, Lahove Mashakasa Beitz Chaim, and also in Tikkun Ezeh, she has Gimel B'chinas Adam. Ak, or Adam the Beriyah, Atikim v'arichamim, or Lupamim, also in the Kudim is Adam the Yetzirah, and El Matziyah is Adam the Asiya. That's what he says here specifically. But he goes on, explains it more specific, more in detail. Okay, so let's do the summary. Kitzur, Ukamoi, Kain, it's like in the 10 spheres we talked about Ma'alamata, Chochmah, Bina, and so on. So it's interesting, here he's talking in the general categories. Like Chochmah and Bina is in the mind, Midas is in the heart. Here he's talking the general structure itself also is defined by a diversity, a structure of higher and lower. Like we see in the human being, the head is a small container, and within it has the revelation of the most superior, the highest faculties of the spirit. V'aguf regel, v'aguf gadol, the body is larger. Uboy mish is great, is big. V'gam uboy mishkan amid is v'keches chetzenim, and within it rests the emotions and the outer faculties compared to the rosh. And parentheses he adds, v'rusad libu gam ki ades bana sheish zeu atzmi. And as far as Rusad Liba goes, that either also comes from through the mind, or it's an atzmi, which is an essential element, which is higher than all the faculties. Uberegel miyata'er. And the regel, the legs, is the diminished energy. Beriyah, in Beriyah, the containers are not yet substantial. So there radiates energy. Yetzirah that the containers now becomes substantial. Humiyah ta'ed is diminished energy. That's machshava v'dibur. That's like thought and speech. And that's why Yecheskel elaborated about his makava, the vision that he had. And the same thing, these three things is also in the general biyah. Let me just say one thing. See, when you read this, right away a question jumps out immediately. He just said here, Beriyah, the kelim and b'mitzias. For pages and pages we've been learning that Eir is not b'mitzias and kelim of Atzilus are b'mitzias, and talks about how tangible they are. You can't say blima. So right here you see how little we know when you talk about these levels. Here's only Beriyah, but it just goes to show you that Atzilus is kelim compared to Beriyah like Eir, mamish Eir. Just to show how these levels are more sublime than you think they are. Because remember the discussion he said was that already after the tzimtzum he says, remember mitzidus nikeres of a spira. And here he's saying that even Beriyah, the kelim are not mitzias. Right? But I've emphasized several times that this requires a very deep understanding how it goes, how it climbs from the bottom up. Okay, we'll stop here. So we did chapter 35, page Nun Tes, 59 and 60. There's one more chapter in this discourse.